One of the biggest parts of any console unveiling is the price. So we've seen throughout gaming history how a bad price point can make or break a console for almost an entire generation. It can be really, really difficult to recover from. Console manufacturers like Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony have to walk a line between offering semi-high-end hardware, affordability for the consumer, and most importantly for them, hopefully profitability, which they sometimes give up on. Often the result is a device that easily costs anywhere from $300 all the way up to $500 or even $600 in a few possibly misguided cases in the past. But where exactly does all that money go? Why do the machines end up costing so much? And when you consider that in many instances the companies building the consoles have actually lost money on every unit sold, how are they supposed to make money in the first place? That seems like maybe not a winning formula. Well, we're here to break down the economics of the console business and why it is that you're paying $400 for what some view in the PC gaming community as outdated hardware. First things first, the general rule of thumb in the console business is that it takes a while for a console to start printing money. Most of that has to do with building a system's user base. It sounds totally obvious on the surface, but the more consoles a company sells, the more profitable it will be. But not for the reasons you might think, because in general, these guys don't make all that much money for each hardware unit sold. Before we get into the cost of the actual hardware, there are years of research and development that go into building the right box. It's not just a matter of getting the right components, it's a matter of design, engineering, testing thousands of configurations, and getting the right form factor as well. These costs can really climb too. Microsoft reportedly spent $100 million on research and development for the Xbox One controller alone, a controller which looks almost exactly like the Xbox 360's. Meanwhile, Nintendo spent $527 million on hardware research and development just last year, while Sony spent more than $3 billion with a B developing the PS3. Those costs inevitably, partially end up being passed on to the consumer in the console's price tag. And then there's the actual cost of the hardware itself. Anyone that's built a PC can tell you it can be a pretty costly endeavor, and mini PCs are essentially what we're buying when we purchase the latest from Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo. Fortunately for them, they do get deals that most of us don't get, since they're, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, and not some dude hoping to get a good deal from Newegg. Case in point, Nintendo spends an estimated $40 to $50 for each Tegra X1 chip from Nvidia, based on some new reports from Nvidia's expected profits over the next year. They're not really available to purchase commercially, but you can bet they cost a pretty penny more than that if you're not Nintendo. Developer kits for the same GPU run just under $200. Now, even though we're not buying the latest in cutting-edge technology when we purchase consoles, the profit margin is still generally fairly slim if it exists at all. The original manufacturing cost of the PlayStation 4 was around $381. Since the system retailed for $399, that meant Sony made less than $20 per console when it first launched. Now there's the Slim and the Pro, but we've got less of an idea what those cost to make. Although PCs built with the same specs as the PlayStation 4 Pro cost around $700 to build, it's likely both of those have pretty similar profit margins to the PlayStation 4 originally, but in the Slim's case, it's probably better as those margins tend to improve over time. On the Microsoft side of things, the Xbox One cost them $471 to build, meaning they were looking at just under $30 in profit for each unit sold, although then once you factor in packaging and shipping and retailer margins, it could have been a slight loss. It usually is. These days, the 2TB Xbox One S sets Microsoft back about $324 to build, meaning they get a much bigger cut of the box since the retail price is $399. So that's one way that these consoles start to make more money the longer they're on the market. As hardware gets cheaper, the consoles cost less to produce and they get more profit from each one sold, especially by this point in the generation, unless you start dropping the price on those. The Nintendo Switch costs $257 to build. Now, per some comments made by Nintendo in a recent earnings report, the amount of money they'll make per console will increase after next March, presumably when their contracts with various parts producers gets an update, so they'll be able to recoup more costs. But this profitability, even when it's slim, has actually been sort of a rarity for the console business, historically speaking. Plenty of consoles in the past have actually sold at a loss. Last generation was especially bad about this. The PlayStation 3 cost more than $800 to manufacture, resulting in ridiculous losses of nearly $200 to $300 per each one sold, depending on the model. The Xbox 360, meanwhile, lost around $125 for each box. That's a lot of money when you're talking millions of units sold. And the Wii U sold at a loss too, which typically isn't the case for Nintendo. The gamepad for the system was so expensive, plus they were worried about turning consumers off with a high price point, so they ended up taking a hit on each Wii U as well. But at the time, that was normal. The PS2 sold at a loss of close to $200 during its Japanese launch, while the PlayStation 1 estimated to have sold in at $80 to $100 loss. And since Sega didn't get that many Saturns off the shelf, they lost hundreds of millions of dollars on that console as a result. So if these consoles are just so expensive, how exactly do the companies like Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft make money? What is it that they're banking on? How does that make any kind of sense? Well, the answer to that is software, licensing, and digital purchases. Software comes in a couple flavors: first-party titles and third-party licensing. Now, if you don't know, first-party simply means a studio or game funded by the console manufacturer itself, like most of Nintendo's popular games. Meanwhile, a third-party title is a game by a company that has no affiliation with the console maker. First-party titles are nice because in addition to helping each console craft its own unique identity, the company gets all the money back in sales, after they factor in their original investment. We've gone over the cost of games and how they make money, so you should definitely check that video out if you're interested in hearing more about it. We'll put it in the end slate. But where the money can really add up is with third-party licensing fees. Typically, anybody who wants to publish a game on a console platform actually has to pay a licensing fee to be on it. We don't have hard numbers, they like to keep those quiet, but it's estimated that comes out to around $7 to $12 of the $60 for each game purchase. When you consider that the PlayStation 4 has sold, it looks like more than 400 million games total, that's as much as $4.8 billion that Sony gets paid just for being a place that people put their games, which is why it's so big for these consoles to land marketing deals with these publishers, even for multi-platform games like Battlefield 1 or Destiny. Console makers want to give the impression that the best experience is on their platform, which helps even more of those licensing fees come their way. That's why they're also willing to hand over big money to buy exclusivity from third-party developers as well. And it gets even more profitable when it comes to digital purchases because manufacturers take a bigger cut on their respective digital services. Plus, you've got the money spent on the subscriptions themselves, which can all get pretty lucrative. Last year, Sony revealed that it made more than $4 billion from PSN revenue alone, which is more money than Nintendo made as an entire company. Microsoft, meanwhile, reported more than $1 billion in digital revenue on Xbox Live. So, while the consoles themselves tend to be costly to research, build, and sell, sometimes barely coming out to any margin at all for the companies or even selling at a loss, they make up for it in the long term with software sales and their digital marketplaces. And those marketplaces in particular are getting more important to each of them all the time. It'll be kind of interesting to watch how the next round of high-powered consoles shifts things even more and what strategies each of the console bigwigs takes for the next generation. What do you guys think of this breakdown of the console business, why consoles cost what they do, how they make their money back? Let us know in the comments.